everybody. This is Chuck Horton coming to you live from the state of Jefferson once again on this Thursday night. And tonight we're going to talk about a cashless society. And I have a guest on, but I'm not sure if he is hearing me right now. Eric, are you there?
I can hear you good.
All right. Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to start you off with a question. Not you, Eric, but our listener or listeners, if we're lucky.
There's just one person out there.
There might only be one. That would be my mom. Hi, Mom.
Sorry,
Anyway,
my dog's by me. We got two listeners. I got a dog here.
Yeah, the question is, what would a cashless society look like? And I want you to kind of think about that. And I'll just tell you, just my first thought is, well, a lot of things would be the same as they are now, but there's a lot of things that would be different. So I got on my good friend Eric Dubin to kind of bring us up to speed on what a cashless society would actually be. And I have a bunch of questions for him and a bunch of things that I've thought of in the meantime. And Eric, welcome to the show again.
It's great to be here, Chuck. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So first of all, just kind of your thoughts on when we say cashless society, what does that mean to you, and what should that mean to our listeners?
Well, I was cruising around Google a bit to see what other people have talked about, and I was actually surprised to see that an operations analyst for Diebold Inc., the banking equipment manufacturer and manufacturer for voting equipment, has an article that was published in October 1st, 1993. That's carried by the Freeman, the Foundation for Economic Education, and you probably are aware of those guys. They're more of a libertarian bent, and basically he's making the argument that even back in 1993, that a cashless society is the ultimate destination for our financial system simply because of the progress of technology. And we saw ATMs introduced and automatic transaction clearing and credit card introduction mostly in the 1970s, but gaining steam through the 80s and the expansion of consumer debt-based economics. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot to be said that supports that argument, that, in the long run, cashless society is where we're going to go. But the really big question is, okay, what's going to underpin that? I mean, what kind of banking system are we going to have? What's going to be the nature of money? I mean, cashless society, we should back up a step, and you've talked about this a lot of times on your show. There's money, and then there's currency. And currency is more typically the kind of unit of transaction and monetary value that somebody will use to make a transaction. But it isn't necessarily that it's going to be evil or a problem per se. Bitcoin is a currency. Transactions can be anonymous. But the sticking point in terms of where we're going to go as a society over the next 10 plus years is really going to boil down to whether or not we have maybe a gold-based system that's cashless, where you can make transactions with electronic currency transaction functionality, but everything would be predicated on gold. So, it's like a hammer. Any technology isn't necessarily going to be used to kill somebody by bonking them over the head. You can build a house with a hammer. So, as humanity moves forward, we have some big decisions to make. And unfortunately, with the nature of the way most societies are these days, the elite are sociopaths and psychopaths that want endless power. They, at this stage of the game, they don't really care so much about the accumulation of money because they have more money than they could ever spend in their entire life.
Yeah.
But the oligarchy that we have from our, the layer over our society that basically runs things are interested in having total domination over people. So we got a problem. This whole trajectory of cashless society embrace is almost, I hate to say it, but it's almost impossible to imagine it stopping for whatever reason other than some kind of cataclysmic financial crash that takes everything down, and that has a certain amount of probability happening too.
Yeah, so. And that was one of the things that occurred to me. And in reading all these people that are proponents for this system, they they say a cashless society is going to be a direct boost to our economy. And I just, at first I'm saying, what in the world are they imagining? Are they on drugs or what's going on? And then I remembered my shows, talking about John Maynard Keynes and the multiplier effect and how even though it's bogus, a lot of people believe it. And I said, yeah, these people have drank their own Kool-Aid. It's these Keynesian crackpots are infested in every aspect of our lives. They're and this is to me the fact. I mean, it's okay to have cashless transactions. I think in a lot of ways they're very inexpensive and they're easy and they make a lot of things possible that wouldn't otherwise be possible. So I think that's great. But to say that you can't use cash anymore that's kind of a restriction of freedoms. And I think that their assumption that this is going to boost the economy is actually the opposite of what's going to happen. Because right now we're in a state of affairs where banks are offering negative interest rates. In other words, they charge you to keep your money. And some people might say, well, I don't have to pay anything. And I would add to that yet. And that's because you're keeping a minimum balance in there, and they're making some money off of that, and that's paying your charges that you would be paying for out of your pocket otherwise. But there's going to be, if there's a cashless society, then anything that you earn from your employer would be direct deposited into your account by an ACH from the employer's bank to your bank, and maybe it'd even be the same bank. But I'm sure there'd be a charge to either the employer or to you or to both of you for that event. And it may not be much. It may come up to as much as 0.5%, but that could be quite sizable if you got paid every week. to lose a half a cent out of every cent you make, out of every dollar you make. That could add up to some money in a year. And really this could be a heyday for the banks. But what it's doing is it's taking money out of the economy, or wealth production and measured in the currency that you've been paid in. It's taking that out of the economy, and they're not producing anything other than a service that is required. And because it's required, I have this feeling that fee will be probably more like 2%.
Well, all you need to do is look at the credit card and
look at your ATM charges. It's it's $2, $3, $5. Depends on what kind of city you're in, and
that may be only on a 20 withdrawal.
Yeah. So
2%.
So there's people are, because of this, and they're going to charge you these fees every month, whether you spend any of the money or not. And so people are going to it's going to be a better economic decision for them to spend their money as fast as they can, maybe one lump sum, or to do something so they can get it out of that bank's hands, because the bank's going to fee them to death. And if they don't have any money in there, then the bank can't charge them anything. Well, that would kind of be or they just keep their minimum balance or whatever. They'd get it down to there right away, because they're going to get charged a percentage of what they have in there, the negative interest. And so all that would stimulate consumer consumption, which is that's the basis of what they say is going to help our economy. And I'm thinking, this is just going to create a bubble, because people are going to be buying things they don't need to spend the money before the bank gobbles it up. And it's going to cause production into areas that aren't really sustainable and won't be sustained, because the consumers don't really want them. It's like they're signaling that they do in the marketplace. And so we'll have things like the housing bubble burst and the stock market bubble bursting. And this will be just a consumer products bubble that bursts, and it will destroy a lot of wealth, and it will really hurt our economy. And I just think it's going to be the opposite of what they predict, because they don't really understand how economics works, and the Keynesians are all wet. They never are right about anything. So that's my first impression. It's because they come to me with Keynesian doublespeak. I'm really suspicious. What are your thoughts on that? Is that?
Well, I think it's more productive to take it out of economic ideological perspectives. I mean, obviously, the Austrian school and perspectives beyond just Keynesian economics, when it comes to the understanding of money, are insightful, and that's definitely part of the analysis. But I think making it even more simple for people would be helpful. And one of the reasons why we're at a stage now where there's a lot of interest in a cashless society is that the banking system is just flat out insolvent. I mean, on a global basis, there's too much debt on a sovereign basis. And then when we went through the housing crisis in 2006 to the financial crash that extended all the way to 2009 or so, if you want to market in terms of when stocks turned around, for example, and the resuscitation of the system from all of the money printing, quote unquote, that the central bankers of the world did. I mean, the reality is such that we're still seeing a banking system that's insolvent, and we have many nation states that have debts that are just not payable in current economic productive capacity in terms of future taxation that would be on the backs of where we stand now. And we have to inflate away this debt, or we have to have it basically dissolve itself in a deflationary crash. I mean, there's really no other way of getting around this quagmire in a lot of different nations. And that, as backdrop, sets the stage for what will probably be, most likely, very high turmoil in financial markets that will create bank runs and will make, for example, money market funds not able to withdraw their funds. And people who have a money market fund account would think, oh, well, I got $10,000 here in my money market fund, and I'm going to be able to write a check off of it, or use it in a...
No, there wouldn't be any checks, Eric, because it's a cashless society. Check is kind of considered like a cash. Have to be a...
Well, no, you're anticipating what I'm about to say. I mean,
okay.
I'm describing the world right now.
Okay,
In the world right now, we have a banking system that's kind of a mirage. The international finance, particularly in the West, the financial health of the global economy's banking system is so bad that they fear runs on the bank. And how do you best stop runs on the bank? Well, one of the tools in that tool chest that would be probably the most powerful of all is to have us transition into a cashless society. And that's part of the reason why policymakers are starting to talk about it.
Yeah, and I this is just my own personal feeling. I really like a lot of the conveniences that are afforded to me by using a debit card. I think it's easy access to my cash, and I don't have to carry a lot of cash with me. But I also really appreciate the freedom, that'd be privacy, actually, that's afforded to me when I use cash. And so I don't want to ever give that up, no matter what. And I think that's important to keep that. So I even, we try and pay for our groceries always with cash, just so we can get to circulate in the economy. And there's something to that. I mean, my wife, she was born and raised in Poland, and as I've talked about on the show many times, but she came from an economy or a society where there wasn't always enough to go around for all the things you wanted. They're not nearly as affluent as we are. And she was very uncomfortable with always using a debit card or something to buy groceries. And she says, no, you don't know how much money you still have left in the bank. And so you're spending money maybe you should be spending for something else. And I said, well, it's food, but it's kind of a primary thing, don't you think? And she said, no, let's just budget for it. So we would actually get cash every month and put it in an envelope, and we would set it up into 4 weeks or divide it into how many weeks are in the month. There's usually 4 or in a fraction. And then we would only use that much money for for our food that we needed. And if we had any left over, we'd go out to eat on the weekend. And that was a pretty good system, except the cost of food kept going up. We had to keep budgeting more and more money for it. But that really alerted me to the fact of how fast food prices were going up. But at the same time, that I said, well, this is actually a pretty good system for people. It's working well for us, and it helped us to save more money. But if we were in a totally cashless society, saving money would be almost kind of an unwise economic decision, because you're just going to be giving more of it to the banks if they're charging you every month to keep your money there. So I don't know if you'd be saving as much in a cashless society. I think that the savings are really important for a real strong economy, because that's really true wealth that's been generated. It isn't money that's been created out of thin air, and that true wealth is what's needed to build the society that's going to be sustainable.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion that if we had an entirely cashless society with a banking system and savings accounts and so forth, that people would see negative interest rates charged on them. I mean, when we live in a world like, say, Switzerland right now, where you get charged 1%, I think, if memory serves, on banking account and savings accounts there, they're doing that because they want to keep the reserves within their financial system there, and to also not have euros from other countries in the eurozone being transacted to Swiss francs and then deposited into the Swiss system, because they're fearful of the Swiss franc appreciating so much in price relative to the euro, the FX, the forex transaction, that they're trying to protect their currency to some extent.
Yeah, that would hurt their
they
trade.
Removed the peg. I mean, they took the peg out, but they still have 1% or whatever it is, if my memory is failing me, transaction for holding in the account, and that's a product of a screwed up banking system in Europe. So people are fearful of what's going on in terms of derivative exposure for the euro currency and the banks that transact and are part of the euro system. So they're looking for safe havens, and one of those ports of perceived safe harbor is the Swiss economy and the Swiss franc. So negative interest rates are a sign that you've got some serious problems going on the macroeconomic front, and we could easily see negative interest rates in the United States if we were to have some kind of a financial turmoil coming, which is highly probable.
All the countries that are kind of leading us into they're maybe a year or 2, 3 years ahead of us in terms of their economic calamity. They've all instituted those measures, so there's no reason to believe that it won't happen here soon too.
Yeah.
I had some more pragmatic thoughts that dealt with, if you don't have cash, what do you do? Those of you out there who are listeners, I don't know, have you ever had to pay a babysitter? Usually what you do, you reach in your wallet and you pull out however much cash is appropriate. When I was first starting out as a father, it wasn't that much. Now it's like 20s and stuff. It's a lot more these days. But if you have to put that transaction through a bank card, if I have to transfer money from my bank to their bank, well, first of all, they have to have a bank account. And second of all, that becomes a transaction that's now open to the IRS scrutiny.
Right.
And that is opening up a whole can of worms in terms of, do you have to send in a 1099 on that now? And do you have to keep all sorts of financial records that account for that? And does the babysitter have to be a legitimate in terms of, does she have to be like a
licensed?
Does she have to have, if she's an immigrant, does she have to have a green card? Do you have to be licensed?
Still coming back.
There is all sorts of stuff that could be just as controls that you can't even imagine that could be placed on us for just paying a babysitter. And so I have this really bad feeling in the pit of my stomach that the worst will happen, and the best parts of this will never occur, because it'll just going to destroy our economy, not improve it. But there may be some silver linings in this cloud. I don't know.
Yeah, and it's also going to be contingent on what happens with just technology facilitating other options. Bitcoin is an example, but and thinking about Bitcoin over the last 2 years, and I've expressed this to you before on one of your shows, despite all the enthusiasm that people have about it, I'm most concerned about the on-ramps and the off-ramps in terms of technology's transaction with Bitcoin, because that's where the IRS can step in. That's where, and they already are. You use Bitcoin, you have to calculate what kind of appreciation you're seeing, or depreciation for that matter, when you transact, because you're holding an asset that they consider taxable. It's not like the dollar bill in your pocket that presumably, theoretically, you earned it and you don't have to pay a tax on it if it goes up in value versus the euro, for example, if you're over in the Euroland zone and buying something. Thinking about just the whole incentives of the oligarchy and the powers that be, so to speak, it's always been the case that organized crime, the dealing of drugs, arms manufacturing and distribution. I mean, all this black market economy stuff that's associated with powers that be for ages, always had an incentive for cash because that's the way that those industries work. And it's really interesting because at this stage of the game, because of the rot in our financial system, the need to protect the financial system, to continue on with just the way the system is set up, the economic incentives for the black economy is no longer quite as important as just the overall economy running such that, in the United States we have 18 some odd trillion dollars of nominal debt, and the IRS and the Treasury Department are very keen on making sure that every way possible to tax citizens happens, and therefore, the babysitter example, it sounds like a trivial kind of thing, but when you add up all of the transactions in our economy that are indeed under the table, it's probably like, I don't know what it is in the United States, but I mean, I've seen statistics for the global black market economy, and it's like 1 in 6 transactions.
Yeah, it's
the IRS doesn't like that.
Some of them are criminal in terms of if you're paying somebody to do a hit or something, but a lot of them are not. They're victimless crimes. I don't know if criminal
Sure.
is really the right description, but I agree with you. It's going to be very interesting to see where things move. We already have seen the Netherlands declare that they're going to try to go cashless in 2016. And before we were preparing for the show, I had found an interesting white paper that was produced by MasterCard, where they rank some 30, 40 nations in terms of their progression and maturity, quote unquote, for using a cashless-based system. And the Netherlands was right up there at the top. No surprise. That was quite a paper. It was almost like they were almost like cashless cheerleaders out there. I expect them to have some pom-poms waving in the background or something. They're
talking their book. I mean, MasterCard would benefit greatly by that kind of.
Well, yes, they would. They would make a lot of money on this. And that money is going to coming out of somebody's pocket, and it isn't going to be the banks. So, there's some other problems I can see. Like, let's just say, for instance, there was a solar flare and it knocked out. It was an EMP pulse, and it knocked out a lot of computers and power stations, and we were in real serious trouble for months. How would we get our money out of the bank in that case?
Well, you wouldn't, and you don't even need to be in a full cashless society. The state of financial transactions today in all of the developed world would just go dark after a day, maybe 2 days, something like that. I mean, if you had a truly cataclysmic solar flare kind of scenario with EMP pulse takes everything out electronically.
Well,
we're already vulnerable to something like that, taking that whole system if it were to happen.
The way I see it or understand it, it'd only be the part that was facing the sun as it passed by. It wouldn't take the whole planet out. So we might luck out, we might not. But it could happen. It almost happened a few years ago. It went off in another direction. We weren't, the Earth escaped that one.
Yeah, everything's so interconnected in the financial system.
So it just has to wipe out half the Earth to stop everything else, though, huh?
It would.
Okay, that isn't. I guess that wasn't comforting, but it's important to know that.
You just look at the derivative exposure and the domino chain that comes with the balance sheets of financial institutions. If you take out 5 or 6 of the big banks, boom, everything else goes.
And you just to see exactly kind of what the progression would be like. You can look at what happened in Cyprus, and this was not a cashless society, but still most of the people trusted their banks and had their money in there, and their banks were in a crisis situation. They closed them, and they didn't open for a long time, and people needed the money to eat, to pay the power bills, to pay their house payments, and they couldn't get their money out. And finally they said, well, you can take out the equivalent of like $100 in a day, but no more than that.
Right.
And that wasn't cutting it. And they were still hungry and needing and having to pay bills. And it was, they were in a pretty bad situation for quite a while.
And again, this isn't something that pertains as a bullseye to cashless societies per se. I mean,
but it would be I guess the point I was making wasn't that this is something that's going to happen if you're cashless, but your exposure to this kind of event is really increased quite a bit.
Yeah, the more when you compare it in the most stark terms to some very poor country with almost no banking system infrastructure and most people dealing with cash for 99% of their transactions, and the culture being set up to perceive the economic value of those kind of transactions, a country like that would be far more insulated than any semi-developed country all the way up to more developed countries.
I agree. Yeah, that seems like we have technology to make it our servant, and we become the slave to it. We can't operate without it, and then that's kind of a dangerous position to put yourself in. You should always have some kind of fallback, or today we were having thunderstorms here, and the business that I have now, it's a liquor store, and it exists on volume, and you make a very small margin per sale, but because of it's a kind of a regulated monopoly operated by the state, and you just have a franchise for it, and they kind of manage your competition. You have a pretty much guaranteed number of sales per day that you make, and so. But if you have something like a power outage, you are in bad trouble because your sales for that day are not going to happen. Period, and there's nothing you can do because we exist. I would say a good half of our transactions are ATM transactions, and even just our cash transactions, we have to run it through a computer inventory thing. And I guess we could write those down on a piece of paper and put them in later, but it would severely curtail our business because a lot of people don't have cash.
Right.
And so, you're just having a power outage during an electrical storm could be a real inconvenience for somebody.
And draws into question the whole thesis of improving economic output because of this great facilitation of transactions. Well, it doesn't do you a lot of good if the card swiper isn't working and the database collection of transactions and so forth are just dead. So who knows? Maybe that'll.
Right. One of the other things that the proponents, the cheerleaders for the Cashless Society bring out is the high cost of producing currency for the economic transactions in the marketplace, and how much it costs the American people to have the government printing money, coining money. And while that's true, I don't think their costs are going to be reduced by having to pay fees to banks to access their money and to use their ATM cards and whatever to make transactions. It's going to either come out of what the merchant is charging. I mean, they're going to have a percent. That's how it is right now. The merchants pay between 2% and 4%, depending on how. Kind of depends on their volume and the average purchase. They have a formula that works out so that they can make money on you, and also whether you will accept cards that have bonus things like air miles and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole argument is a canard. It's a farcical argument.
It is.
When you look at it from the grander perspective of the banking system in and of itself. We have the Federal Reserve, which largely is a private organization, at least in its functional, important portions. Never mind the debate society that goes on at the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee. I mean, the real nuts and bolts of the financial system is privatized. If it weren't privatized, if it was, for example, the Treasury Department printing notes instead of debt that is fiat in nature, but notes that are paper-based that are going to go back out into the economy once they print them. They actually make a profit on that, and it accrues to the system in and of itself because it would be owned by the American people directly. So that whole argument about oh, woe is me, the financial system has a cost to produce all of this currency is just, it's nonsense. I mean, the only part of our currency that is controlled by the Treasury are the coins that are produced. And you hear the arguments about the coins a lot of times because of the inflation debasement of our currency, making even now the zinc within the penny threatening to be more expensive to procure than the actual penny's value in its spending power.
They started copper cladding the pennies because the copper was worth more than the penny, and now the zinc is worth more than the penny.
In 1982 is when they transitioned from the penny.
Yeah,
and now they're talking about aluminum nickels or getting rid of pennies and nickels. All kinds of crazy stuff.
Well, it's they certainly don't have much purchasing power anymore. I mean, you used to be able to buy a pack of gum with a nickel.
Yeah.
It doesn't buy much anymore. It's the new penny,
which will be digitized, so you won't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Now there are also some things that people say this would help them to fight crime, and I really am kind of dubious at that. Also, I think if you make money illegal, money will be a black market commodity too. It's going to, and people they'll have some. There'll be currencies out there that they may even be based or backed by precious metals. Who knows? But they may just be. I can go back in history. I remember in the history of the 19th century in the Old West, there was just a shortage of money, so the stores would mint their own coins.
Yeah.
And you go out in some of these ghost towns in the Old West with a metal detector, you can find some of these old coins. They're just stamped out of pot metal, but they were used as currency, so people could make exchanges. The currency coming from the government was pretty hard to come by. It was not out there, period, and that's how it was. So I'm sure that if they outlaw money, someone's going to be out there minting their own coins, and it will work as currency in the black market, and having cash will suddenly be a crime, and just like it's like say they outlaw guns, only criminals will have guns. They outlaw money, only criminals will have money.
Yeah, you were saying in a show earlier about barter and how barter will, in fact, probably be made illegal in these kind of scenarios. And
yes, if you're using barter as a means to determine a value of something, your chicken's laying some eggs and you want to sell the extra eggs that you can't eat, you better do it as a transfer from bank to bank so they can make sure that you report that on your income. It's not you're not taking that $2 and not reporting it on your income because we may be entitled to a percentage of that.
That's the level of government control. I mean, money at its base.
Yeah, and do you have a license to sell those eggs? And when were you last inspected? And so on and so forth. They're going to shut down. They'll use this as a hammer to shut down a lot of stuff they don't like going on right now. So you have to buy your food from the big food corporations.
Yeah, you can see incentives and their systems like that throughout the entire economy. And legislation passed that are supposedly to protect farmers and protect consumers. And in the final analysis, it almost always is about protecting the multinational large producers of food. And wherever you look, you see these kind of things going on. It's ass backwards when it comes to what would be true free market capitalism. We have a system that's largely corporatist. It's a fascist form of system.
Yeah, and remember, everybody, they call this form of an economy a vampire economy, and it has that name for a reason. It sucks the lifeblood out of the economy, and it's doing it right now. You're witnessing the vampire is got its fangs sunk deep into the neck of this economy.
And if we want to talk about solutions and what would be a good thing to see, it isn't necessarily that a cashless society per se, by definition, has to be a negative. I mean, for example, if we had a gold-backed international monetary system with the ultimate value of any kind of currency predicated on an underlying form of gold reserves held in vaults in private hands as opposed to government hands,
and even
full transparency.
Yeah, and maybe possibly remove the monopoly status of the banks.
That's right, and keep the transactions completely transparent in terms of the auditability of them, and but at the same time having the anonymity, the anonymous quality of cryptocurrency. I mean, it's theoretically possible to imagine a cashless society that does indeed result in greater freedom and greater efficiency for economic transactions. But the trouble is that to get to that place, we have to figure out a way where governments don't screw stuff up. And history shows that governments almost always screw things up. And the powers in the financial oligarchy in particular, but more broadly defined as well, have every interest in keeping the system the way it is now and transitioning to some form of an electronic system that benefits their interests as opposed to creating a free economy. So, like I said earlier in the show, we've got a really serious problem on our hands because it does look like this is the direction we're going to move just simply because of the nature of technology. We've transversed 10,000 years where we started out trading in a barter system, and now we're using debit cards and credit cards and ATMs and so forth for the lion's share of at least developed economies.
And that was a great point you're making. I just think the caveat is as long as you keep this a free market activity, there's nothing to fear. It's
right.
When the government uses this to control us, this could be pretty fearful. That's a pretty dark scenario.
And money all by itself, one of the definitions of money is that it's a form of communication. Every transaction actually sends the desires of two parties or more, and you're dealing with something that provides psychographic value to potentially totalitarian governments. I mean, we already have pretty much every phone call and email and electronic communications across the board in the United States archived. They may only be able to process 10% for persons of interest and so forth. But, you add on top of that absolutely every transaction you ever make in your life. I mean, the scope of political power that can accrue to the system is beyond imagination. I mean, it makes 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World look like
even if you were super clean, if you were like you'd never ever done anything improper in your life, all it takes is somebody entering data improperly, or they could even do it purposefully, and you're screwed. It's like that movie Brazil.
Right.
There's a bug, and they're typing out the thing, and the bug lands in there as the typewriter key comes in, and it changes his name, and all these bad things happen to him, and he ends up dying at the end. And it's very sad, but it's funny, but it's just a black comedy. It's just, I almost cried at the same time I was laughing. It was, if you guys haven't ever seen that movie, I really recommend it. By the way, it's an awesome movie from the guys that did Monty Python. But back to the cashless society. I think that the solution to almost every problem is freedom, and certainly if there were a problem with this, I think that would, the cashless society, that would be the way to fix it, is to increase the level of freedom with regards to all your transactions. And if cashless was the best way to go, it would become the predominant means of exchange. By the way, in chat, Dalnick was saying that he didn't know if he could get a bottle for an ounce of silver, and I said, I can get you a bottle. You come into my store, Dalnick, and you got an ounce of silver. There's a wide selection of bottles full of alcoholic spirits that you could purchase for an ounce of silver, and you can't get all of them. Some of them will take 2 ounces, but I'd be happy to exchange for you. Now, what I have to do that, I have to purchase it myself and then make the exchange with you on an individual basis, kind of black market, but I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, and if we had free competition of currencies, the whole argument that people frequently make of, well, what's an ounce of silver going to do for you? You can't eat it. Well, you can't really get some nutritional value on munching on your Federal Reserve notes either. I mean, it's just a currency. And if we have a free system that allows for free transactions and free will amongst economic actors, then, that whole argument just disappears. And, precious metals or any other form of currency can transact accordingly. Ron Paul has made a career in Congress trying to argue for free money, for example, and having free competition where gold and silver could freely trade alongside the Federal Reserve notes that we use in commerce now. His ulterior motive was, pretty straightforward. He basically wanted to see competition in currencies such that the superior currencies would end up killing the Federal Reserve note system, the debt note system that's owned by private banks.
Yeah.
We're a long way from that, but it is interesting that certain states like Utah and a few others have made the use of United States minted coins, gold and silver, payable for all debts, including taxes by the state.
Yeah. Now, gotta clear up something for Dalnick. Dalnick, Drew is no longer on the show. He is retired from radio broadcasting for the time being to devote full time to his aquaponics business. This is Hook that's talking here. So just so you guys know who this is. And we are reading your chat, and we find what's refreshing to see there's some people actually following the show for a change. So that's good. Thank you. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt too much. But and by the way, my store is in Medford, and I'm not really allowed to advertise it, but you'll find it. It's called Spirits World, and that was just naming it. But so if you're ever in Medford, stop in and say hi.
Yeah, and take him up on his offer and get some vodka for a silver piece.
Yeah, you can. Oh, and we have about 20 feet of shelving, 5 feet, 5 shelves per foot of vodka. It's a lot.
Which
of
in
vodka.
and of itself might be a currency in the day of electronic money.
I don't think the ink was dry on the Constitution when, and this was in Pennsylvania, they were having the same trouble the people out west were. There was not enough currency in circulation. They couldn't, it was hard for them to have transactions because nobody had any money because it wasn't being, someone is calling. How could someone else be calling? Anyway, so they were using distilled spirits as a medium of exchange. And I'm going to add this person to the call. I don't know who it is, but hang on here.
There's probably the IRS agent telling them they're going to audit your store.
Okay, so now we have 2 phone calls on here. Who are we talking to?
Chris from Canada.
Chris, excellent. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
So what did you want to talk about?
Well, I found it interesting. We were in the chat and we were talking about currency and legalese, and then after I got finished suggesting a couple of things, you guys were talking about the same things I was talking about. It was the bartering system and
and
cashless societies, and I found that really interesting because I'm very involved in all of that.
Yes, it's I think that barter is a natural state, but over time, certain commodities are recognized as retaining their values, and they become the medium of exchange. That's how gold and silver became, considered money for over 6,000 years. It doesn't mean that's the only thing. When this country was, before it was even a country, when it was still a colony, they used tobacco leaves to pay taxes in North Carolina. They used, up until the 20th century, salt was used all around the world as a medium of exchange. It had a recognized value. But
animal pelts too were a big deal.
Yeah, and there's been lots of things used as money or currency, actually. Money has got to have a little bit better track record than I got to be something to be called money. But it's lots of things have been used for that, for exchange over the period of time, and it always starts with barter. It starts with barter. It does.
Yeah, well, I mean, for 5,000 years they had tally sticks.
Mm-hmm. And this is amazing how this would work. I mean, this people would put a little notch in it in Europe somewhere, and they'd be down in Egypt, and they would recognize it, and they would they would adjust his accounts or whatever for that. It was an amazing system. It worked.
Yeah.
Yes, or they wouldn't have used it.
Yeah. And so now here we are, and everybody's going out and killing themselves to get that almighty piece of paper that the government prints through a private for-profit corporation, and nobody gets it. Nobody's, we got to go back to basics, is what I'm thinking.
Well, it's because the reason why they want to perpetuate this system, or at least the banking system does, is because they make a lot of money on this. They have devalued the currency that we're using by almost 97% in the 100 years that the Federal Reserve has been in existence, and that devaluation has gone somewhere, and most of it's gone in their pocket.
Yeah, well, the production of assets that can produce future wealth, i.e. companies, has been the primary store of value, and when you add on that real estate and hard assets and general commodities, etc., where the people who receive the money first are able to procure the assets that transition past the inflation rate. So it's the middle class and to a very large extent the poor that get screwed in this kind of system, and it accrues wealth to the top.
And what they're really doing is just counterfeiting. There's a law against anybody else doing this except the Federal Reserve, or in Canada, whatever your central bank is called.
Yeah, well, we have Comer up here. It's a Committee on Monetary and Economic Reform, and they got a lawsuit to force our government to give our money making ability back to the Bank of Canada. Unfortunately, our Prime Minister sold our country out, and so we are no longer sovereign. So that is not going to do us any good, even if they win the lawsuit. But we did at one time have our own government, create our own currency, and we did rather well with it.
Mm-hmm. And, I just mentioned to you there's a person in the Libertarian candidacy, or running for office. In fact, the Libertarian Party is fielding a pretty impressive. Well, there's several of them. One of the people running is a past guest on this show, Jeff Berwick, and I urge you to support him and everybody else in the Libertarian Party. They really understand what's wrong with your monetary system, and I don't know if they could do any good.
I'm in communications with Mark Burnison, and he has mentioned Jeff.
Yeah, that's Berwick is really smart guy.
We're going to have him on another show, and I've invited him to an old candidates meeting, actually. I'm still waiting back to see what goes on with that.
He's a really busy guy, but he's awesome, and he'll give you your time if he's got it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I was an ex-member of the Canadian Action Party until I realized how communist-leaning it was. So I kind of backed off on that, and you try different things, and you learn as you go, right? And the Libertarian Party seems to be something that I'm interested in.
Sometimes I find myself interacting with those people because they know something's wrong with the system, but their first response is always going to be, well, we have to have a government solution here, there, whatever. And the people that are the communist type style, they think that socialism's a good deal. They're probably more prone to that than ever, and it just takes a little bit of conversation with them sometimes, and they can realize that every time there's a problem, you're giving government the power to solve it. You're giving them the power to rule your life, and it becomes more and more corrupt. It's not the corporations that's corrupting, it's the power you're giving the government. And once the government gets that power, it's for sale. Let me tell you. And who has the money? The big corporations. And that just makes them entrenched. They're able to build their fortress around their wealth, and then they've got a system that just drains the rest of the economy. It's the vampire economy. It's called fascism. It's the ultimate end of socialism, communism, everything. It all ends up as fascism in the end.
It's also driven by this concentration of wealth that we were talking about a moment ago. The financial oligarchy is the most powerful amongst the various oligarchical segments of our international economy in the West in particular. I mean, the banking sector represents probably something on the order of about 25% of the global production of goods and services, quote unquote, in terms of its nominal value. I mean, it's grown to be a monster. And layer on top of that other oligarchical type industries, the defense industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, I mean, on and on. I mean, what we have now is a bastardization of capitalism. We just, people don't recognize this very readily, but we do, in fact, have a largely fascist type of economic system with a socialist escape valve for the problem of, in the United States, for example, an underclass that's now become permanent, and rather than face revolution, we have 1 in 6 people on food stamps.
And that doesn't last very long, though. I think that, once they have all the controls in place, they'll start demonizing the people at the bottom, saying they're causing the problem, they're draining all the wealth, when really it isn't true. They're just trying to exist. And people draining all the wealth are the ones doing the counterfeiting.
And it's not a coincidence that the ultimate progression of this kind of corporatist system is a fascism of being willing to categorize people as an underclass of useless eaters, eugenicists. It's not a coincidence that eugenicists and corporatists are kissing cousins.
Yep.
Well, you know what I find funny is if I go to my neighbor's and he has some tomatoes and I help him fix his shower stall, and he gives me some tomatoes for that. The government wants to know. This is the way they're getting now. They want to know about that because it must be taxed. And then everybody seems to be willing to let the government take their taxes from them up front, and without realizing that they are the real thieves. And then you'll get somebody that'll get, I got a $500 return this year, but you paid out $10,000 in taxes up front for a full year.
And not only that, but it adds to the cost of everything you buy.
Well, yeah, no, I just don't understand why people don't realize who the real criminals are. I mean, for me helping out a neighbor and him giving me a few tomatoes, in the government's eyes, I can be considered a criminal.
Yeah, you probably would be in their eyes, because that just shows you how perverse their thinking is.
Well, but we accept it. I mean, how do we get people to realize this? That there's something wrong with the whole system.
I think there's more and more people awake every day. And I really think that there's a much higher level of consciousness than there was, let's say, let's go back to 2008 when Ron Paul first ran for president. It's just been growing and growing and growing, but we're still only about maybe 3 to 5% of the population. It's got a long ways to go, and it probably won't happen in my generation. I'm almost 64 now. I probably won't live to see it, but I think people that are in their 20s now could live to see a free country again.
There's a couple of scenarios that could prove to be massive catalysts that would speed things along in an economic crash that takes down the country in the order of the Great Depression, such that the federal government can't even answer the phones, never mind police and cracked heads and so forth to keep order. That kind of scenario might happen where you do have a grand devolution and the masses start asking questions along the lines of who the hell did this and how did it happen and how do we fix it. That kind of outcome is, in fact, why there is a growing police state, because the powers that be are very fearful of things getting out of control. The financial market could very easily prove to be that kind of a catalyst, unfortunately.
Yeah, so anyway, we're drawing to the end of our show. We still have a few minutes left. I forgot your name, caller. I'm sorry. Say it again.
It's Chris from Canada. But I'll let
Chris,
you guys
you were
go.
awesome.
You were awesome. I don't want to keep from your show. So
no, you were awesome. Thank you for your call. Call again sometime. That was a great call.
Okay.
Eric, thank you so much for your time tonight. I think if nothing else, we have a show in the archives that people will be able to access. It's got a lot of good information here, a lot of things maybe you can use to get your friends thinking about stuff like this so they can be more informed and say, well, I'm not sure I want this exactly the way it's being sold to me.
Yeah.
And
that's
so
really the take-home point. I mean, this is the direction that the elite want to move in, and it's also the direction that technology will tend to push our society towards. So we need to, as the human race, be conscious about what's going on. And for, the realm of political activism, people are active on all various different subjects, and the realm of money is really important. And we need to move forward as consciously as we can to guard our freedoms, because if this goes down in a way that a lot of the elite would like to see, it could very easily make 1984 scenarios look like garden variety vacation compared to the dystopia potential of our currency and money system being a means of totalitarian facilitation.
Very well said. Well, this is going to wrap it up. We're a little bit. We didn't run out of material, but we was too little time to start more. So I just wanted to thank everybody for listening today. Guys in chat were awesome. I'm really glad to see so many of you were paying attention to what we're saying, and hope to see you here next week. Next week, I believe we're going to welcome back Jordan Page to our show. He's going to be able to come on. We'll make sure he has free time that day, and he'll be on, talk about what he's been doing and been up to since we last had him on. And then in 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to have Telly Blackwood. You guys may know him as Leatherface. He's going to be our special guest. So keep tuning in on Thursday nights. We're making this a really exciting night, I hope, for everybody. And have a good Memorial Day weekend. Remember what the Memorial Day weekend's for. It's to remember the people that kind of paid the ultimate price to fight for freedom, and it's not just a 3-day weekend to go out and have hot dogs and beer, although that's nice too. Thanks a lot. It's not Drew, it's Chuck, it's Hook.
Break